Did you know that in Hartford, Connecticut, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this chilling spike in unsolved murders, a lot of them targeting women who were just trying to survive. And today we are diving deep into one of those cases.
Okay.
The story of Elizabeth Miller, a woman whose life was tragically cut short in the summer of 1994.
Wow.
And her case is still open nearly 30 years later.
It's a case that really takes us back to a time when Hartford's Asylum Hill neighborhood was really grappling with a surge in crime.
Yeah.
The streets were rough, buildings were abandoned, there was this palpable sense of unease in the air.
Right.
And Elizabeth's case, while heartbreaking in its own right, also kind of reveals the challenges investigators faced back then, especially with the limited forensic technology that was available.
And you know what strikes me is that we're not just talking about statistics, we're talking about real lives, real families, forever impacted by these tragedies.
Right.
To help us unpack all of this, we've got the original police reports, interviews with the lead detective on the case, Detective Drew Jacobson, and insights from the true crime podcast, The Deck, which dedicated an entire episode to Elizabeth's story.
That's right. This deep dive isn't just about revisiting a cold case. It's about exploring the complexities of an investigation that spanned decades, the tireless efforts of those seeking justice, and the enduring impact on the victim's family.
Absolutely. So let's start with Elizabeth.
Okay.
Paint a picture of her life for our listener.
So Elizabeth was a woman battling her own demons. Substance abuse had taken hold, and it's believed she may have engaged in sex work to make ends meet.
Oh, wow.
Life had dealt her a difficult hand, but she wasn't alone.
Okay.
She had a close relationship with her brothers, especially George.
Okay.
They described her as someone who, despite her struggles, had a kind heart and was deeply loved.
It's those relationships, particularly with George, that become crucial as we try to retrace Elizabeth's final steps.
Absolutely. We know from George that he last saw Elizabeth on a Thursday afternoon, just a regular day, gave her some money for groceries.
Okay.
And that was the last time he laid eyes on her alive.
And then we have Ronald,
Yes.
a friend of Elizabeth's, who places her with George and at least one other brother outside of a credit union the following morning, Friday.
Right. So we're starting to build a timeline here, piece by piece. Thursday afternoon with George.
Got it.
Friday morning with Ronald. And then things become less clear as Friday night sets in.
That's when another figure enters the picture, right?
Jack. Yes, Jack.
He admitted to spending time with Elizabeth that Friday night, just hours before she was found.
Jack's statement to the police places Elizabeth leaving his apartment sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. on Saturday morning. He claims they were drinking, using drugs together.
Okay.
It's a hazy account, but it's one of the last known glimpses into Elizabeth's final hours.
And then the grim discovery. The crime scene itself paints a stark picture, doesn't it?
It does.
An abandoned building, an overgrown courtyard, and there she was. It's a scene that speaks volumes about the state of the neighborhood back then.
It does. The brutality of the attack is undeniable.
Yeah.
The police reports are difficult to read. Blunt force trauma to her head, neck, and chest, likely from stomping. The level of violence inflicted upon her was horrific.
Imagine being the first officer on the scene. You're immediately confronted with the sheer brutality of the crime, and you know you've got a complex case on your hands.
Yeah.
No murder weapon, limited forensic evidence to collect, and the clock is ticking. What were the investigators working with at the time?
They collected what they could. Her clothes, a condom, a green lighter, an earring. They even bagged a leaf with her blood on it, hoping for any clue.
Oh, wow.
But back then, in 1994, DNA technology wasn't what it is today.
Right.
They were limited in what they could analyze and process.
Adding another layer of complexity. Remember, this was a neighborhood where people were often hesitant to talk to the police.
Absolutely. Substance abuse, potential sex work, a general distrust of law enforcement.
Right.
All these factors created a wall of silence, making it even harder for investigators to piece together what happened to Elizabeth.
So they're trying to solve this puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah.
They know Elizabeth was last seen with Jack, but his timeline, while shaky, seems to check out.
Yeah.
And then there's this mysterious white T-shirt found at the scene covered in someone else's blood.
Right.
Was it a clue, a red herring, or just a chilling coincidence in a city already grappling with violence?
It's a question that haunted the investigators. The blood wasn't Elizabeth's.
Yeah.
And there was nothing directly linking it to her case.
Oh.
So it was ultimately dismissed. But you can't help but wonder, what if?
Yeah.
What if that T-shirt held a clue that could have cracked the case wide open?
And the detectives, they kept digging right.
They did.
They interviewed Elizabeth brothers, again, her friends, anyone who might shed light on her life, her routines, her enemies.
Right.
What were they hoping to find?
They were desperate for a break in the case.
Oh,
During one of the interviews, Charles, one of Elizabeth's brothers who was incarcerated at the time, offered a theory.
okay.
He suggested that maybe Elizabeth was involved in the drug trade and crossed the wrong people.
Oh, wow.
It's a plausible theory given the circumstances,
Yeah.
but without specific names or concrete evidence, it was another dead end.
It's a stark reminder that these investigations often hinge on witnesses coming forward,
Yes,
on people being willing to share what they know.
right.
But fear, distrust, self-preservation,
Mhm.
those things can keep people silent,
Absolutely.
even when they hold crucial pieces of the puzzle.
It's true. Sadly, Elizabeth's case went cold. Years passed. The trail seemingly grew colder, but the story doesn't end there. In 2001, 7 years after Elizabeth's murder, another woman, Alicia Ford, was found murdered in a strikingly similar manner just a mile from where Elizabeth was discovered.
Wow.
And this is where the investigation takes a dramatic turn.
This new case, it wasn't just a tragic echo of Elizabeth's murder, was it?
Yeah.
It was a sign of something more sinister at play. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
So the discovery of Alicia Ford's body really sent shockwaves through the Hartford Police Department.
Yeah.
Suddenly, they were confronted with this possibility that they weren't dealing with just isolated incidents, but a pattern of violence targeting vulnerable women.
So it wasn't just Elizabeth and Alicia. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a string of murders, all bearing these chilling similarities. Lyden Roberts, Aida Kenyons, Rosalind Casey, the list goes on.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to think about the lives lost,
Mhm.
the families left to grieve.
Each of these women had their own stories, their own struggles.
Right.
But they were all united by this horrific fate. The details of the crimes were eerily similar.
Yeah.
The brutality of the attacks, the blunt force trauma, the signs of stomping, it painted this grim picture of a perpetrator escalating in violence.
And there was that detail about the Newport cigarette butts
Yeah.
that were found at several of the crime scenes.
Yeah.
And while they weren't present at Elizabeth's murder, it does make you wonder about that green lighter found near her body. Could it be a connection that was missed back then?
It's impossible to say for sure, but it highlights how seemingly insignificant details can become crucial in these investigations.
Right.
And thankfully, by the time Alicia Ford's body was discovered, DNA technology had advanced significantly.
That was a game changer, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
They finally had a DNA profile that didn't belong to any of the victims. A tangible lead in a case that had been shrouded in darkness for years.
You would think that with a DNA profile, they'd quickly identify the perpetrator and bring him to justice.
Right.
But as we often see with cold cases, there were more twists and turns to come.
What happened? Did the DNA not match anyone in the system?
Exactly. It was a frustrating setback. They
Yeah.
had a lead, a real chance to catch this guy, but he was a ghost, invisible to the system.
Yeah.
And it meant that he was still out there potentially preying on more women.
And tragically, that fear became reality.
Mm-hmm.
Another victim, 33-year-old Rosalie Jimenez, was found. Same MO. Stomped to death, partially clothed.
Right.
And the DNA from her crime scene matched the profile from the previous murders.
The case was building. The pattern was becoming undeniable. But the killer's identity remained a mystery. The pressure on the investigators must have been immense.
And then finally, a break in the case.
Yes.
In January of 2002, a name surfaced. Matthew Stephen Johnson,
Matthew Stephen Johnson.
a 38-year-old man with a disturbing history of violence, particularly against women, particularly sex workers.
Right.
And when they apprehended Johnson, there was a pack of Newport cigarettes in his pocket.
Wow.
It's these small details that can be so powerful in connecting the dots, in solidifying a case.
Absolutely.
Johnson was ultimately charged and convicted for 3 of the murders. Alicia's, Aida's, and Rosalie's. He was given 3 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he'll never harm another woman. It must have been a relief for the families of those victims to finally have some sense of justice.
Absolutely. A victory for those 3 victims and their families. But it leaves us with a lingering question.
Yeah.
What about Elizabeth, Rosalind, and Lyden?
Right.
Their cases, despite the similarities, remain officially unsolved.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have this man, clearly a serial predator, convicted for these horrific crimes.
Right.
But without that irrefutable DNA evidence, he can't be definitively linked to those other cases.
It highlights the limitations of technology at the time and the challenges investigators face with cold cases. But the story doesn't end there.
Okay.
Even after retiring, Detective Jacobson hasn't given up on Elizabeth's case.
He sounds like a truly dedicated detective. What's he been doing all these years to try and solve her murder?
He's reviewed the case countless times, looking for any missed clues, any angle he might have overlooked. He's retesting evidence as technology advances, exploring new avenues like familial DNA testing, even consulting with a university that specializes in genetic genealogy.
For those of us who might not be familiar with those terms, could you explain what familial DNA testing and genetic genealogy are?
Sure. Familial DNA testing is a technique where you search DNA databases for partial matches,
Okay.
indicating a possible relative of your suspect. Genetic genealogy uses DNA testing in combination with traditional genealogical methods to trace family lineages and identify potential suspects.
So Detective Jacobson is leaving no stone unturned, using every tool at his disposal to try and find answers for Elizabeth's family.
His dedication is truly remarkable. He believes that Matthew Johnson is responsible for Elizabeth's death, but he's also committed to following all leads to ensuring that no possibility is overlooked.
Right.
And that commitment has led him to consider another potential suspect, someone who emerged from a separate investigation.
Wait, are we talking about a different suspect altogether? Someone other than Matthew Johnson?
Yes. His name is Juan, a former Hartford police officer with a disturbing history of violence against sex workers.
A police officer?
Hmm.
That's a shocking twist. What's the connection between Juan and Elizabeth's case?
While Juan was never officially named a suspect in Elizabeth's murder, his pattern of escalating violence against sex workers and the timing of his crimes raised red flags for Detective Jacobson.
This is where the case gets really complex, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We have two potential suspects, both with disturbing histories of violence against women, both operating in Hartford during the same time period.
It raises so many questions.
Yeah.
Could someone else have been involved in Elizabeth's murder? Could there have been more than one perpetrator operating in Hartford during those years? Or are we grasping at straws trying to find an answer where there might not be one?
It's a question that has clearly haunted Detective Jacobson, and it's one that we'll explore further as we enter the final part of our deep dive. So it's almost like we're trying to solve two puzzles at once. You got Matthew Johnson on one side, Juan on the other.
Yeah.
And those puzzle pieces might not even belong to the same picture.
It's a great way to put it. You have Johnson convicted for murders with striking similarities to Elizabeth's case,
Right.
fitting the profile of the perpetrator, but without that concrete DNA link.
And then you have Juan,
Right.
this former police officer shrouded in his own darkness. Never officially tied to Elizabeth,
Right.
yet his actions, his escalating violence, just can't be ignored. Makes you wonder, what if his brutality went further than what he was caught for?
It's a chilling thought, and while Detective Jacobson can't officially comment on whether Juan was ever formally considered a suspect in Elizabeth's case, the possibility hangs in the air,
Yeah.
adding another layer of complexity to an already intricate investigation.
It feels like we're caught in this frustrating limbo. So close to answers, yet just out of reach.
That's the harsh reality of cold cases, especially those from a time when forensic technology was limited. We may never know definitively whether Johnson, Juan, or someone else entirely was responsible for Elizabeth's death.
But Detective Jacobson hasn't given up hope, has he?
No, he hasn't.
Despite the lack of that irrefutable evidence, that DNA match that could connect the dots, he's still searching for answers.
His dedication to Elizabeth's case, even after all these years, is a testament to the power of human perseverance. The unwavering belief that even cold cases can one day find resolution. He's a firm believer in following every lead, no matter how small, no matter how improbable.
It's that kind of commitment that often leads to breakthroughs in these cases, right?
Oh, it does.
That refusal to let go, that constant reevaluation of the evidence, the willingness to embrace new technologies.
Exactly, and it speaks to something larger than just solving a crime.
Yeah.
It's about honoring the memory of the victim, acknowledging the pain of the family, and recognizing that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, the pursuit of justice must continue.
This deep dive into Elizabeth's case has been a roller coaster. The brutality of the crime, the dead ends, the emergence of not one but two potential suspects.
Right.
The tireless efforts of Detective Jacobson. What stands out to you most about this story?
For me, it's the human element. It's so easy to get caught up in the facts, the evidence, the procedural aspects of the case, but we can't forget that at the heart of it all is a woman who lost her life, a family forever scarred by her absence.
Right.
And then you have Detective Jacobson driven by this profound sense of duty to bring closure to those who have been denied it for far too long.
It's a reminder that behind every cold case file, behind every statistic, is a human life,
Uh-huh.
a story waiting to be told, a victim deserving of justice.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that pursuit, that unwavering commitment to finding answers, is the most powerful tribute we can offer. So for our listeners out there, what are your thoughts on the evidence? Do you think Matthew Johnson, despite the lack of DNA evidence, was responsible for Elizabeth's murder? Or could there be more to Juan's story than we know?
These are questions without easy answers, questions that might linger long after this deep dive is over. But they are questions worth asking. Elizabeth Miller's case remains open, a testament to the enduring mystery that surrounds unsolved crimes and the unwavering hope that one day the truth will be revealed.
And that's what makes these deep dives so compelling. We grapple with the evidence, we consider the possibilities, and we're left with that lingering feeling of wanting to know more, of needing to find resolution. Elizabeth's story is a stark reminder that even in the face of cold, hard facts, human determination can keep hope alive.
And that even in the darkest corners of our cities where violence can cast long shadows, there are those who dedicate their lives to seeking justice, to ensuring that even the forgotten victims are not truly gone, their stories forever etched in the pursuit of truth.